Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Creamer, and I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Global Engagement here at Robert Morris University. I'm happy to welcome our in-person and virtual guests to today's lecture, Gaming in Brazil, A History, by Dr. Marina Fontelan, the Robert Morris University Rooney Visiting Scholar for Spring 2022. The Rooney Visiting Scholar Program was established through the generosity of the Rooney family in 2004 with the purpose of enhancing the richness and diversity of teaching and scholarship at RMU by inviting international scholars to serve as visiting faculty members and to be in residence on campus and interact with students and faculty. This spring, our Rooney Scholar is being co-hosted by the School of Engineering, Math, and Science and the School of Informatics, Humanities, and Social Sciences, and I thank Deans Kalovich and Ali for hosting. Dr. Marina Fontelan is an experienced historian and science and technology studies scholar at the University of Campinas, Unicamp, in Brazil. Dr. Fontelan received her PhD in science and technology policy from Unicamp and holds further certificates in history, also from Unicamp. Her primary research subject is on the sociological aspects of video game localization, and she has written several articles on games and its historical representations, and games and violence. If you're interested in inviting Dr. Fontelan to speak in your class, please feel free to email me. And any students watching via the live stream can contact the international office if they're interested in receiving set credit for this event. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Marina Fontelan.
Okay, thank you so much, Jennifer. I would like first to thank RMU, the entire team that is hosting me. Thank you so much for sponsoring me here. I also would like to thank Unicamp and the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, which were the universities in which I did part of the research that I'm presenting today, which is actually part of my PhD dissertation. And also I am thanking CAPS, which is the Brazilian National Foundation for, which gave me grants during my entire PhD. So let's begin. My aim with this lecture is to talk a little bit about the history of video games in Brazil, and also presenting a little bit of my personal experiences of becoming a scholar interested in video games. I'm going to start presenting a little bit of the Brazilian context, so what is this country that we're talking about? And then we go and talk about video games themselves. So without further ado, so Brazil is a country that was colonized by the Portuguese. Therefore, our official language is Brazilian Portuguese, and the difference between Portugal Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese is super related to the differences between American English and British English. So we have these, the same structure. And we also, in Brazil, we do have hundreds of native languages from our native peoples there. So anyways, Portuguese is not the only language spoken in Brazil. So just for you to have a better idea, better grasp on what Brazil is, this is Brasilia, our capital. I live here in Campinas. São Paulo is here, and here is Rio de Janeiro, okay? The Amazon rainforest, as you're going to see here, is here on the very far north of Brazil, and here are all other biomes that we have. So this is Brazil in a very little nutshell, but as you can see, it's a very large and very rich country. So let's talk about a little bit of history of video games there. Just for you to know, Brazil is also the largest video game market in Latin America, and as a historical context that will be very important when we are talking about games, is that from 1964 to 1985, we were under a military dictatorship which had media censorship. Then from 85 to 98, we had a transition to democracy, and from 89 on, we are a democratic country. Okay? So let's focus on video games. So what am I calling a video game? I really like this definition from Bruno Marino, who is a scholar and also deals with video game localization. So video game is a multimedia interactive form of entertainment for one or more individuals, powered by a computer, hardware, and software, controlled by a peripheral. This peripheral can be everything. It can be your own body, if you are thinking, for example, about Kinect. It can be any sort of controllers that you have. So if there is a game that can be played on this controller that I'm holding, so this is also peripheral, keyboards, etc. So, and also displayed in some sort of screen. And it doesn't matter the size of the screen here. So it can be a giant IMAX screen, or it can be as little as our smartphones on our pocket. They can be used as entertainment or as part of serious educational or training programs. Thematically, they can portray any topic, activity, or parallel universe which the human imagination is up to conjure up. Okay? So I really like this definition because it brings both the technological and the creative aspects of video games. So let's start a little bit with our history in video game in Brazil. So it all starts in the 1960s, as we usually do for several countries. By the 60s and 70s, we have Taito, which is a Japanese game company that comes to Brazil, and they start to produce pinball and arcade machines in the country. Okay. What they did is that they produced their machines here in the United States, and they actually imported those machines to Brazil, and they changed them. So I have two examples here. So the first one is this one that is called Flash. So as you can see, the backlash here and the play field, they are very different. So they just brought like all the components from the United States to Brazil, and then they adapted it. So we had the Flash, we have Flash here. They changed the name to Shock, and also, as you can see, the display for the higher scores are different. And also, there are some difference in the play field. So there are some bumpers and some differences here. And another thing that they also did was to adapt themes. So they did brought their Playboy pinball machine to Brazil, but they adapted it to Oba Oba. Oba Oba was a bar that had samba shows in Rio de Janeiro, and it was very famous at the time. So they decided to put it into a pinball machine, and actually they show the owner of Oba Oba, and he was called Osvaldo Sargatelli. Osvaldo Sargatelli was a radialist in Brazil, and he has worked with radio for the longest time until he was caught into the military dictatorship censorship, and then he decided to open this bar that has these dancers for samba and telling the history of the samba in Brazil. So, continuing on, Taito actually was very successful in Brazil, and the company grew a lot, and they actually started venturing in other areas of entertainment too. They actually started to manage some theme parks in Brazil. They started with Play Center, which closed, I think it was around the 90s or the 80s. Anyways, it was a very big theme park that we had there, but it's closed now. And nowadays, they are also responsible for managing the biggest theme park that we have there, that is called Hopi Hari. So this is Taito's history in Brazil, and it is still a running company today. However, we also had some companies that they decided to bring home consoles to Brazil, and two of them were Philco, which is a a electronics company, and also Ford, yes, the car company, they decided to venture in Brazil with the home consoles. And they actually released in 1977 the first console in Brazil, which was Telejogo. And as you can see, it's a Pong game. Okay, that's the only game that you could play at Telejogo. But anyways, it was a venture there, and it was very successful. So after Telejogo, several other game consoles were released also in Brazil. So for example, we also had Atari 2600, we had the Magnavox Odyssey 2, and Intellivision. So they were Brazil was very keen of games, right in the 80s. It was very difficult at the time to get access to the games, remembering Brazil was still in a military dictatorship, and we don't, as the docs from this area are still classified, we don't have access to know if this difficulty of getting access to games in Brazil was an intentional thing, or it was just it was difficult to get there because it's difficult to import. Okay, so this is something that we had a lot of issues during Brazilian history. So to get access to video games there, you need to have contact with somebody that would come to another country to buy these things, or through contraband. Okay, so that's the way that we got them. However, Gradiente, which was an electronic company in Brazil, saw the potential of video games in Brazil, and they decided to release the Phantom system. So the Phantom system has a very interesting history, because when you look at it, you see it seems like a common console, and the controller kind of reminds us of a Master System. However, these were the games that they ran on. In other words, the Phantom system was a Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES knockoff. So what Gradiente did was they got the game, they reverse engineered it, and also the games, the cartridges. So they started to produce this game in Brazil. However, they didn't have the authorization for Nintendo for them to do this. So what happened is that Nintendo found out about the Phantom system because it was a huge success in Brazil. And there was, of course, a legal dispute over this. And Gradiente actually had a authorization for producing Nintendo products. And it was the first time that Nintendo decided to produce their consoles and their cartridges outside Japan. So Brazil was the one who actually managed to do this with the knockoff that was called Phantom system. So besides that, the 1980s was also very famous for localizing games in Brazil. So localization is the process inside the industry in which we adapt a game and we translated it into different languages than the one that they were created. There are several types of localization. We have, for example, box and docs. So we are going to take a look at the box of the game. They're going to translate it and also all the documents inside it, but they're not going to change the game. There is also the full localization. So all the audios, all the text, everything will be translated, will be adapted into different languages besides the box and the other documents inside it. So, and here the relationship between games and society will become more evident. So let's go back and take a look again at Brazilian history. So this is Serra Pelada. Serra Pelada is a region in Pará state on the very north of the country. And in 1979, they found gold in the region. And in 1980, they started a gold rush. In 1984, we had a peak production. And in 1992, the government decided to end the exploration there because it was the biggest manual gold mining of the world, and it was also, as you can see here, the working conditions were poor at best. So this image is actually, they were actually done by a very famous photographer in Brazil called Sebastião Salgado, and he does have a lot of interesting pieces. So if you want to take a look, he's a great photographer. So this is what happened in Brazil at the end of during the entire 1980s, and as we usually do, we decided to cash in on this situation. So Os Trapalhões is a very famous comedian group in Brazil. They had episodes running from 1977 to 1993, and they had more than 20 movies, including this one, Os Trapalhões na Serra Pelada. In other words, there was a comedic group making fun of all this situation, okay? And, of course, in a movie. But this story doesn't end here because of this. So the movie got translated into a video game. So Pickaxe Pete, it's a game about a miner that has to run from boulders and get gold, okay? As it is a Magnavox Odyssey game, it's not very detailed, you don't have like too much of a story or anything like that. So what people decided to do when bringing this game into Brazil? They used the Trapalhões again, and their movies on Serra Pelada to again cash in on the situation. So this is the first time that we have a localization in Brazil. So a generic game about a miner actually became a very successful game in Brazil because they used this very famous character there. So in this case, is Gigi, which is one of the four comedians that we had for Trapalhões. So besides that, we also had the foundation of Brasoft. So Brasoft is founded in 1984 and had a great success in localizing and dubbing games into Brazilian Portuguese, especially the ones from LucasArts. Okay, so LucasArts was a very big publisher here in the US, especially for their point-and-click adventure titles. So The Secret of Monkey Island is especially known for everyone. And of course, they actually ventured into the 3D realm with Green Fandango, okay? When they brought these games to Brazil, they used Brasoft to do all these localization. And because of that, of course, these games were very popular in Brazil. I'm just going to show you a part of this game, so you can hear how this game is actually working in Brazilian Portuguese. So, can you?
E não graças a casos furados sem comissão de baixo nível como o seu.
Ei, Manny, o chefe pediu pra você não sair cedo hoje. Ele quer conversar com você sobre alguma coisa quando voltar da viagem.
Diga a Dom que não se preocupe. Não vou a lugar algum. Principalmente com clientes como aquele. Onde eles arranjam essa gente? Não se qualificam para nada que preste, então não posso vender nada de bom. Fico de mãos atadas. Condenado a vender bengalas para um bando de burros por toda a eternidade. Preciso de clientes melhores, preciso de um santo. Preciso pôr as mãos num santo rico e morto.
Okay, so that's a very short introduction to how the game sounded like in Portuguese, and they were very, as I said, very popular during their time. So let's talk then about 1990s. So the 1990s, we saw a great expansion in the Brazilian video game market, and this expansion was actually very crucial for game development in Brazil. And for that, we need to talk about a company called Tectoy. So if you have taken a look at my website, you're going to see that my main picture actually have this plush toy, my Sonic plush toy. And what is very, and like this toy is very dear to me, of course, but the thing that it is very interesting of it here is that it doesn't have, the main producer of Sonic in Brazil wasn't Sega, but it was Tectoy. So Tectoy was a company founded in 1987, and the people who formed Tectoy were former employees from Sharp and Mitsubishi. The goal of this company was to bring what they called the intelligent toys to Brazil. So because of these people, as they had like already contacts with a lot of Japanese producers, they managed to get a new contract with Sega. So they started to produce Sega products in Brazil. Okay, and this was very successful. They brought the entire production line of Sega was done in Brazil. So all the consoles, games, etc. were done in Brazil, which meant that it was cheaper for us to get it, and because of that, they actually managed to get 80% of the market. In other words, nobody cared about Mario in Brazil. Everybody was crazed for Sonic. So that's the reason why I have a Sonic and not a Mario in my bookshelf. So this is a very interesting case in Brazil. And also, I mean, Nintendo actually managed to come officially to Brazil in 1993, but they were very late on the game. So even though they managed to do that, Tectoy and Sega were the masters of Brazilian market. And another very interesting case about Tectoy and Sega is that their contract with Sega was not only to produce the games and consoles and everything in Brazil, I mean, importing everything, but they were also responsible for creating unique content to the Brazilian market. So, again, let's take a look at another very, very dear character roster that we have in Brazil. So this is Turma da Mônica. In English, is Monica's Gang. Okay, there is already a full translation for English of these characters. So these characters were created in 1959. They are the most popular comic characters in Brazil by far, and they were created by Mauricio de Souza. They have nowadays a ton of comics, cartoons, games, and etc. And they are the ones responsible for the first officially developed game in Brazil. So, as I said, part of Tectoy's contract with Sega was to create special content for the Brazilian market. So what they did is that this is a game called Wonder Boy in Monster World, and they actually reprogrammed it to run with Turma da Mônica's character. So this was our first case for game development in Brazil. So this game was officially released in Brazil, and it was also very successful because of this use of Turma da Mônica. And this game is called Turma da Mônica no Castelo do Dragão. It plays exactly the same as Wonder Boy Monster Land. And I mean, we can also consider this as also a case of localization. So they got this like very generic character again that nobody would care in Brazil, and then they brought in a very dear franchise that we have there. So it's both a localization and a first development process. So this was very big. And besides also, of course, creating new games and new content to the Brazilian market, they also needed to continue localizing games to Brazil. So Phantasy Star it is an RPG, a role-playing game that was released in Brazil in 1991, and it has a full localization in it. So all the box, all the documents, the entire in-text games were translated into the Brazilian Portuguese, and this was very important to Brazilian gaming because it actually consolidated the RPG genre in Brazil. So this was also a very successful title that we had in Brazil during the 1990s. So just to sum everything up, Tectoy is a big thing in Brazil, and it's actually a company that exists up until today. Okay, so the end of the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s, Brazil was facing a very deep financial crisis. So because of that, we actually had some issues in the industry of video games in Brazil. So Sony decided to release PlayStation in Brazil, but it wasn't very successful. People didn't have money to buy games. And also Gradiente stopped their production for Nintendo products. And also, Gradiente was also producing PlayStations, and they all stopped because they decided to import everything, which actually made the consoles even harder to get and even more expensive. So we had this problem, this financial crisis problem, and but this didn't hinge Brazilians to get games and to be creative actually with them. So, one thing that it's also very important to remember about this is that when people were getting into the games, into the consoles, they were pirating them, which means that they were unlocking the consoles too, so the consoles would be able to read all kinds of media inside it. So this is a motherboard for a PlayStation 2, and this they rewired and reshipped PlayStation 2 board. So in other words, this is probably what my personal PlayStation 2 looks like inside. So everybody got this pirated version, so the games would be cheaper to get. And of course, the companies weren't happy at all about the situation. But one thing that it's very important, as I say about it, is that creativity with games in Brazil were very large. So it means that as we got access to these consoles and these games that were pirated, we actually managed to tinker with it and to create patches and mods for these games. Okay, and they actually became very popular. So let me bring you some examples. Okay, so the first one is called the Bomba Patch. This is a Winning 11 knockoff. So Winning 11, it's a EA Games, Electronic Arts game that plays, it allows you to play soccer, and of course soccer in Brazil is very important. However, the first, when Winning 11 got in Brazil, people saw that A, it was in Portuguese, and B, there were not Brazilian teams in it. So for the Bomba Patch, they repatched everything. They put into the game the Brazilian soccer players that were very famous at the time, and also translated it into Brazilian Portuguese. And of course, the Bomba Patch is a very famous case of how we tinkered and how we patched video games that were pirated to Brazil. Besides that, we also created various other knockoffs. So this is a knockoff of Guitar Hero that's called Anime Hero. So instead of rock songs that you would get all the songs from your favorite anime series that were famous at the time. So probably Sakura Card Captors and Pokemon, Digimon, and etc. So these were the first. As you can see, creativity just ran wild in Brazil during this time. However, as nothing is actually a sea of roses, we actually had some problems in Brazil related to government. So Brazil, games were very successful in Brazil. That's nothing, something to open for debate. However, as the prices were going up, and of course the piracy was running wild in Brazil, we also had some other problems related to government that they decided to censor some of these games. So Bully and EverQuest were the first two that were censored. Bully, because they were, for those who doesn't know, Bully is a Rockstar game that's all about this kid that is living in this school, and he has to survive this environment with like all these bullies and everything, and he has to bully. So it's a very violent game. And EverQuest, it's an RPG, but it was censored because it was considered too sexual for kids. So these ones were censored, but we had a very interesting case too. So as I said before, we were very keen on modifying and patching games to make it look so a little bit different and play a little bit different than their original ones. So there was a very famous case that is for Counter-Strike. So Counter-Strike, for those who are not familiar, it's a first-person shooter game, and it's very famous. There are like esports competition nowadays, so it's a very big thing. However, when the Counter-Strike was brought to Brazil, they actually made another level for it, which is called CS Rio. So CS Rio, you would enter into Brazilian slums, favelas, and you would participate in an army operation in there. Okay, so the government decided to censor it because of its violent content. However, Brazilians didn't manage to keep this game alive by, of course, like pirating it and selling the copied pirated CDs all over. And when this patch was created in the first time, the developers wanted everybody to play it for free. So it also became a very interesting case of getting access and to this kind of artistic endeavors. Okay, so and also as you can probably see, the Brazilian video game industry was in a crisis, not in a creative crisis, but in a financial one, which actually meant a crisis in the localization method. So Brasoft actually closed, and because of that, we were getting less and less games in Brazilian Portuguese. So it wasn't a very good time for gamers who wanted to play their games in Portuguese and etc. I mean, if you wanted to play a game, you had to learn English or any other language that the game was available into, and of course, it hindered an entire generation of gamers. So as time moved on, we actually recovered from our financial crisis at like the second half of the 2000s and during the entire 2010s. We actually had a very big economic growth during this time, and this recovery was actually very good to the population because, in general, this financial recovery was very widespread within the Brazilian population, which means that like poor people were getting access, for example, to more food, to better housing, and of course, this means that in the video game industry, the companies started to pay attention on us again. So Sony, Microsoft, Blizzard, Konami, and Ubisoft start to get more and more interested on us. Then the very pinpoint that changed everything in Brazil was Microsoft that decided to release Xbox 360. So we didn't have the original Xbox in Brazil, but we had the 360. It is officially released in Brazil with 2 games in Brazilian Portuguese. So Halo 3, which is also a very famous franchise from Microsoft, also first-person shooter, and also Viva Pinhara, which is a friendly family game in which you have to take care of a garden of pinharas. So it's a very interesting and it's a very cute little game. After that, the Brazilian video game industry actually started to grow a lot, and we went from piracy to like a more official production. So we actually created new specialized studio for localizing game. So for example, Voice Mass Media and Sergio Moreno Films. These are studios that started to tackle localization of games again, and they're very successful on their endeavors. Ubisoft and EA Games, they actually set up new offices in Brazil to start developing the games, even though they actually changed it back, so it's just like they're just publishing offices today. And other multinationals actually came to Brazil, and they're very successful there. So Greenleaf, Atari, Echo Games, and Riot Games. Riot Games is famous for League of Legends, so it is a very big studio that we have there. And nowadays we have around 321 developing studios in Brazil, and our production is actually very good and very interesting. So these are some of the examples that I brought you. So this Thorin is our first AAA game that we had that was developed in Brazil. It was developed thanks to a set of laws that we have in Brazil called Lei Rouanet, and these laws allows for several companies to donate for cultural events, cultural development, and they have like taxes discount. So it's a very important. So that's a very important case, and because of that, we have our first AAA game called Thorin. And this is a story about a girl who needs to fight off a dragon and protect her castle. So we also have Horizon Chase Turbo. This one was created by Aquiris, which is a medium-sized company that is located in Brasilia. And it was actually, this is a racing game, and it actually received a lot of praise and a lot of awards. Okay, we also have Eternal Hope. Eternal Hope is a Hollow Knight type of game, so it's a platforming. It's very difficult, and that's one of the most recent of this slide. We have Distortions for those who like Myst and these dreamy-like adventures. So that's also a game that got a lot of praise and a lot of awards in Brazil. And Knights of Pen and Paper 1 and 2, which was actually even mentioned by famous American YouTubers, and in this case was The Completionist. So he's a very big channel. So we are getting recognition and praise for what we're creating now. So in case you are curious and you know a little bit more about, so these are some of the sources that we have to study the industry of Brazilian video game and also the history of Brazilian video game. Of course, the vast majority of it is in Brazilian Portuguese, so you need to learn the language if you wanted to tackle the country, but I mean, all other countries, you would need to. I mean, Brazil is not like an exception, but we do have like a map of the industry, several census, and also we have a bunch of scholars who are graduating or even who are professors already and who has written a lot about video game and gaming in Brazil. Okay, so thank you so much, and I hope you have enjoyed this talk. Thank you.
Anybody has any questions, please?
Question? Yes, Fisher.
Marina, thank you. That was very enlightening.
Thank you.
And the history of gaming in Brazil. So my question to you is that it seems that Brazil was able to localize the game,
Yes.
right? Because affordability was an issue. Right? So how successful has it been? Has the mass been able to use it? Or affordability is still at the higher range, even if it's
Yeah, so Sushil asked about localization and affordability of games. Games, so I mean, in this case, like when for example, Tectoy were localizing the games into Brazilian Portuguese, I mean, of course, they studied the market and they saw, for example, that at least for Phantasy Star, that D&D was a big thing in Brazil. So they decided to bring this game because of that. So they were always very careful on choosing exactly what to bring. It's not like everything that they could bring to Brazil. So this was one method. And I mean, of course, in the case of Tectoy, people were able actually to buy the non-pirated version of the game. So that's also a way for the industry to keep on going. In the case of like PlayStation 2 and etc., they just imported the games back to Brazil, and it was very expensive. Nobody actually has the non-pirated version of whatever games that they wanted to play. That's and like in this case, there were no localizations, so that's how they rolled. And in the case of Microsoft, it's I think, okay, so that's my opinion, my hunch. I don't have like the data for it. I think it was related to their experience also with Windows. So like they were seeing people actually getting computers and being able to afford the computer with the original, with like the non-pirated version of Windows and etc. So they decided to take a risk and bring Xbox to Brazil, and it was a huge success because of that. But again, not all games are brought in Brazilian Portuguese, and we have the same issue. Yes?
Can I add just a question?
Sure, of course.
Your last slide, you showed a whole bunch of the different ones that are kind of popular right now
Yeah.
in Brazil. So are they much more widespread than some of the others in terms of affordability?
Yeah, they are more, yeah.
So how much would it cost there in terms of, do some quick,
A quick dig on how much Brazilian games cost today. Okay. Yeah, I mean, those games that I showed on the slide, they are popular. They got very popular, and they were like newer releases. In Brazil, if these current games would cost around 30 to 50 reais, which is around $6 to $10, so it's very affordable in general, of course. So in this situation, but these games were also very successful outside Brazil because they are not only in Brazilian Portuguese. They have also their English version, and which is actually the one that they get the most money from. So that's. Yeah, no, it's fine, no worries. Okay, any other questions? What? Laura?
So I'm also not a gamer,
Yeah.
so I hope my question makes sense. I was really struck by the cultural, historical moment of the gold mining with the mining
Yes.
game that was created, and it kind of connected for me to historical, painful cultural moments like World War II, for example, that has been turned into video
Yes.
games, or current wars that are being plotted and turned into video games. Do you feel like that trend will continue in the future? And what are your reflections on that trend of real world pain being turned into video games?
Yeah, so war games, so real world wars becoming video games. So I think yes, this is a trend that's here for stay. Like Counter-Strike is very actually famous for this. And they also, I mean, each new release is a new war that they're tackling on, and etc. And I mean, it's something that it's here for stay. It's profitable. It's something that everybody wants to engage because there's this like hero story that everybody wants to live in. So like wars actually become these very profitable things for video games. On my side, on my personal side, I don't like playing them. I haven't like gone through them because I think that this is a way of like glamorizing war, and this is something that we shouldn't do. So that's my take on this issue. Okay. Any other questions? Sure, of course, Lucio.
So Marina, in Brazil, in the academia,
Yes.
do they offer undergraduate programs in game design?
Yeah, so programs in gaming design in Brazil. So they're still few and far between. Okay, so most of people are still in programs such as engineering or art or etc. And then they go to work for the video game industry. So that's the pathway that the majority of people are taking. However, there are some universities that are offering like undergrad programs on video game development. We still don't have, as far as I know, a graduate program only for game studies. People usually do like communications, or in my case, science and technology policy, science and technology studies, media studies, etc. It's very difficult to have like a very specific graduate program for this. Okay. Jennifer.
So I know in the U.S., again, I'm not a gamer either, but in the U.S. a lot of parents worry about, maybe particularly their sons playing a lot of video games and a lot of violent games. And of course, in the U.S. we have a lot of problems with gun violence and school shootings, and so people are trying to tie those two together. What is it like in Brazil? Do you talk about things like that, violence in video games?
No, okay, so in Brazil, violence in video games. So violence in video games here in the US became a thing because of Mortal Kombat. So before Mortal Kombat, everybody was playing whatever game that they wanted, and that was it. And then after Mortal Kombat, because of the amount of violence and it being available in a home console, they created that ERSB system. So when you get a new game, you can see for which age it is appropriate. It's like a movie. I mean, it's the same. I mean, it's the same process of the movie. In Brazil, we do have the same. We have like a system that it's alike, but as far as I know, people don't like pay too much attention on it, and frankly, like violence in Brazil is actually much more related to like inequalities than of like gun violence and people being able to buy like guns on the supermarket, which is something that we don't have. So it's a very different type of violence that we have there. So yeah, and it's not tied to video games at all. Okay. More questions? Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.